Okay, so I'm just going to start by asking the first question. It says, based on Baird, discuss differences in functions, characteristics, and outcomes of short versus long-term recovery processes and perspectives. Which perspective processes are more difficult to achieve in your view and why? So I don't know who wants to answer first or who has notes on this one.
I felt like the long term, make sure were more. Oh, it was long term is more like trying to get back to the normal everyday life, and short term focused more on like just getting to a point where we were, managing everyone's like vital needs and the minimum standards to at least get everything accomplished, where the long term was like getting back into a normal routine, out of the disaster tempo and all that stuff completely.
That's what I saw in the reading as well, was the short term being preserving life really at the base of it. Those essential functions, health, food, housing, whatever people need immediately. And then, like you said, rebuilding, the community, legal systems, future planning, that kind of thing that Baird mentioned as well.
And I think a lot of the short term is more likely to overlap with some response efforts, where the long term would be after all those vital life support needs and that sort of thing are taken care of.
It's more of an emergency, like an actual emergency response.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's after the immediate disaster, but you're still in somewhat of a disaster mode, as opposed to long term when you're really trying to reconstruct things.
Okay. Do you have anything to add?
Hey guys, just want to let you know that I'm so lost right now, so I don't know which question is, because I mean I don't have it on the syllabus. Well, I actually have on the syllabus right here, but I don't know where you taking that.
If you look on the week 1 content, there's like 3 different modules for week 1, and in one of those modules it contains the instructions for the Google Hangout, where it has all the specifics about the prompts and literature for this unit, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's in you.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm going. Just give me 1 second, okay, please.
We'll come back to it. Adam he doesn't have a lot of time because we took a lot of time to get started. So
it's all right. Just keep going. I'm just trying to finish up some stuff while we're talking, so you're fine.
Okay. Well, okay. We'll wait a minute then.
No. Keep going. And just while y'all were talking, I was just typing some stuff. But you're good. We can move on or whatever you think.
Okay. Did we already go over the second part of number 1?
It just says which perspectives are most difficult to achieve in your view and why.
Okay. I did see, actually, he also mentioned about the length of time that it takes to engage in those long-term recovery processes. And so, I mean, it's the thing about how long something takes is the longer it goes. And I think this is somewhere in there as well. It becomes unpredictable. And so you don't really know how big of a project it's going to be or how much planning is going to be involved until you actually dig into it, kind of like a construction side, if you will. So you're like, okay, this community or this portion of the community is going to need this many resources, maybe, or we can allocate what we have and the manpower and everything to last maybe 1 year or 5 years. You get to that 5-year mark, and then you realize that there's actually a lot more work to be done. So yeah. I think that focus was aiming towards the long term being more difficult because of that.
I think so too, and I think sometimes you don't plan for subsequent disasters while you're still recovering from the other disaster, like the hurricanes I was talking about on the discussion board in Puerto Rico. They just got hit like one right after another, and they're still to recover. Short term, long term.
Yeah, the subsequent disasters are huge. Go ahead.
Hey, just real quick, are you talking about this right here? The
all right. How are you?
1, is that the questions you guys asking?
We can't really see on there. What does it say at the top?
It says discussion board 1. Is that the one?
No, that's the discussion board. If you go to, are you in Blackboard?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so go to the week 1 content.
Okay, I'm in.
And then once you're on the week 1 content, I believe it's in, is it module 2 or 3? I have to get
It's
it myself.
module 2. Mhm.
Okay, so module 2. So there, within that folder, there should be a second option there. Not the first one, but if it's module 2, if it's not module 2, it's 3. But
I see it.
and then if you scroll down just a little bit, depending on how much is there, I'm gonna get into it myself.
I think it's towards the bottom.
Yeah. Okay. So
Oh yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
And yeah, after you click here to launch it, it gives you the reading materials under the activities, required readings as well. There's a video, and then it says Google Hangout on Air 1.
Yep.
And that's where those questions are. So those are the question prompts we're following.
Okay. Cool. Got it. Gotcha. Yeah, because I mean, I'm so lost with this with the syllabus, because she sent it twice, the due dates, and I mean, I took her last semester, but it was face to face. So, and actually, this is my first online class, which on the program, because always I take face to face. But if I can ask you something about that, just bear with me, please.
Okay, so let's move on to the second question. Ruben stated, I have concluded that the research and knowledge base in the realm of long-term recovery is seriously inadequate to the needs we face today. Using Barrett's article, provide evidence and specific examples of challenges to long-term recovery faced by researchers, practitioners, and policymakers.
I agreed with the authors that it probably has been neglected somewhat. I thought most of the arguments on that side seemed more valid. The ones on the no side were more, kind of like trying to make up for lost time or that sort of thing, but it didn't necessarily prove that it wasn't ever neglected. I felt like, just the numbers alone, and Ruben, where it was the 07, 08 numbers for all the different phases for reports and stuff that were done, and none were done on the response stuff, that says a lot. So, I don't think there's any doubt that it's probably been neglected, but I would think that it's because of just the far-reaching and complex nature of response. It's less, or I guess more difficult and less likely for someone to go out and do like really expansive research on the response end, but that's how it seemed to me.
And I think that kind of builds on what Melody said too about how short-term becomes long-term. And I think that after so long, after you're working on the short-term, then, and it becomes long-term, you kind of like become complacent in a way.
Yeah, and I think for all the initial, the media response, the frenzy, all that stuff is more, it's more focused on the disaster itself and the initial response and maybe some initial phases of recovery. But as time goes on, it gets it loses its sex appeal in the media, and for better or worse, we have pretty short memories here. So where the response is important at first, when you're talking about things 2 or 3 years down the road, all of a sudden people lose interest real fast. They forget about the devastation. And so all the training and emphasis is on what catches the most flack. And the most flack is bad response or initial recovery efforts or failure to mitigate, prevent, some of the fallout. So that's where everybody's focus is. By the time it's calmed down to, reconstruction a couple years down the road, people have, for the most part, lost interest, with the exception of, a few on the academic side, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. The hype goes away, and then along with the hype, I think goes like the financial part of it, because then people they're not as interested in being invested in that and throwing money at it, because, it's not as relevant as when everybody was flooded out. That's kind of gone, and people have moved or abandoned those neighborhoods, whatever it looks like, and that hype's gone, and then the money, you know, and then the voting for where we spend the money, and then there's not a lot of investment in people's minds, and then obviously that comes out monetarily where the long-term planning could have benefited. So
when for those of us in like the emergency, you know, first responder field, you know, I know as a cop and everything, what the bad light that gets shed on us is always going to be with the response phases. And if we're the ones doing a lot of the planning, we're going to focus on what we're trained to do. And that's operating in a disaster environment, the response side. We're not really getting into, you know, rebuilding down the road, that sort of thing as much. So our focus is always going to be on that. And if we're driving some of the research, then it's going to follow along with what our interests and what our main like concerns are.
Right. Do you have anything to add, Ubaldo?
I mean, just like I say, guys, I mean, I didn't read it, anything. I mean, I'm so lost. Actually, this is my, you know, this is the first time that I've done this thing, YouTube, whatever. And just give me some time, please.
Okay.
I'm just catching up. I mean, in fact, I mean, I wrote an email to her, you know, about the things I'm doing. But I mean, as far as catching up, just give me some time. I mean, I already have the questions, but for next time, I mean, I will be there. I'm just listening, and you know, and if I have anything to add, I will.
Okay, sounds good. We'll move to the next question then. What is the difference between emergency operation planning and continuity of operation planning? Whitworth identified 9 elements of continuity operation plans. What are they? Which ones are the most critical in your view and why?
Well, for the first question, which, you know, what you just mentioned, what is the difference between emergency operation and planning? As far as I know, you know, planning is making a plan, which it can be A or B, to how to respond to any type of emergency. In this case, you know, it can be a hurricane, tornado, whatever. But making it work for the benefit of, you know, the community.
Does anybody have anything to add? Melody?
Sure. Yeah. For the emergency operations planning, I think more immediately to what's the plan to deal with whatever it is that just hit. And then the continuity being, how do we keep those essential functions going while it's still occurring? And then after it's still occurring, basically like the keep up, to just keep it after the initial response or after the initial first part of the disaster, just those main functions. Yeah, to keep procedures going, information systems, vital data being protected, being able to delegate authority properly to be able to continue operations and conduct essential functions.
Yeah, and I think that it even mentions in the text somewhere, there can be a lot of emergency plans that don't entail a continuity of operations plan. You know, the example they use in, I think, the book or the paper was a fire alarm goes off or there's a fire in the building. Well, that's not going to necessarily rise to needing, you know, continuity of operations, continuity of government, but there is still an emergency plan that is put into place there. And yeah, the continuity of operations plan is going to be more for really large scale disasters, like you were saying. I mean, essentially moving the operation, keeping the vital parts of any operation alive. So I think, you know, that's a lot of the big difference, is just the scale. Yeah, you can have both of them together, but you don't necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive, I guess.
The way I kind of saw it too was short-term versus long-term continuity. I mean, it can be short-term, but it's mainly for longer.
Yeah, it's still looking to the long term. It's looking past, all right, we're out of the building, now what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think of it like I'm sorry, were you?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Like a traffic accident on a highway, something that's more immediate, short term, and then obviously there's a plan to respond to that for, you know, emergency procedures for that dealing with traffic that day and everything, compared to maybe an electric outage for an entire city that's going to last a few weeks or something like that. Because then you have the problems as far as communications and, you know, not as much businesses as like emergency communications and response and stuff like that. But yeah.
What do you think is the biggest challenge or most critical? Which are the most critical in your view of the 9 elements that he mentioned, which I think were like bolded? Plans and procedures, identification of essential functions, delegation of authority, communications, training, implementation of continuity.
Yeah, those are the 9 that I got. It was the same. But
Yeah, training and exercises. I don't know if we probably already said that one. Procedures for activation and relocation.
yeah,
I felt
overall too, like identifying what functions are essential and what activities have to continue. I mean, without that, then the rest of it's kind of futile. So I think that's got to be like high on the list. Is we've got to decide what we need. You know, what kind of vital life support we need to keep the operation going. Because if you don't encompass enough, it's not going to be effective. But if you try and wrap too much into it, then you're going to expel resources on things that weren't essential, and you're still going to end up not being an effective plan.
I also felt like it was important to figure that out before the emergency, because it seems like sometimes some things are important to some people and not as important to other people. So going into it, if you already have the understanding that these are the most vital operations that we need to restore, then you don't have that lapse in communication.
Right. Well, and that drives everything else as well, because that's going to drive who's in charge, you know, whose authorities being delegated to, the order of succession. All those things are going to be driven by what functions are most important and who should be in charge of those functions.
I was going to mention that delegation of authority, but that actually really ties it in when you put it that way. Because like you said, if you don't know what's important, then that's actually going to vary who ends up being in charge. But I definitely thought of the delegation problem just because, you know, you have these people who are like, who am I supposed to report to now? You know, am I like in a different group? Am I supposed to be in this focus group with this other department or team or agency or just whatever it may be? Because people are so used to reporting to their own chain of command. You throw in something else or it's a bigger scale event, and then, you know, there's going to be some more interoperable communication, and then some of that might be a little bit more fluid, but then they don't know who to, you know, get orders from or report to, whatever.
I think that happened a lot during Katrina too. Nobody really knew who was in charge of what.
Definitely.
I mean, I just want to add something. You know, you mentioned communication during Harvey, which I volunteered because, you know, I live here 36 minutes from Houston. I volunteered, and the thing I experienced, you know, firsthand, it was a lot of lack of communication, you know, between city, county, and state. So I guess, you know, for that communication subject, I mean, you know, and you probably know this, guys, that communication is the key, because, you know, Harvey, it is real bad, and I saw this firsthand.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
Okay, so the last question is, what are the key components of the Business Continuity Information Network for rapid disaster recovery model? How do you think this model could be most useful to strengthen the collaboration between businesses and emergency management entities? Do you think this model could be more useful for short-term or long-term recovery, and why? So I guess we can just begin with the first question. What are the key components of the Business Continuity Information Network for rapid disaster recovery model?
The ones I took as the key components were like the disaster management database, disaster recovery, ID, situational awareness, dynamic contact management, intelligent decision support. Yeah, I think those are the ones that I took from the article, is what they were saying were the main components.
That's what I found as well, and they definitely, I think it mentioned that those stemmed from those key elements. I think there are just 3 of them: the critical communication, local damage assessment, and recovery plan execution. That was right by that as well. But.
How do you think this model could be most useful to strengthen the collaboration between business and emergency management entities?
I think it has a lot of potential uses. Now, I'm not really a tech guy, so some of that was definitely above my head, but it also seemed like a pretty complex, like maybe long-term plan that we're going to need a lot of pieces to come together for it to really be an effective piece of the like EM puzzle. At least my understanding, with all the different components, everything that would have to go into it, all these businesses, large and small, to really come together and integrate this software and the system and input data and all that. While it seems like if it worked, a really great plan, I guess I'm doubtful of how long it would take to actually come to fruition. And, we see like real outcomes from it that aren't just from a handful of like selected businesses or that sort of thing. That was just my take. I mean, good ideas, but I'm just not for sure about its implementation, practicality.
A lot of it seemed to me like it was about that data organization and making sure resources, whatever that looks like for businesses specifically, are accounted for. But what stuck out to me from those was the situation awareness, different from situational awareness, but updating managers and officials with information about the overall conditions and threat levels, because I think people get really kind of almost angry if they're not giving enough information, and they're like, well, what's going on now? What is it going to look like? And then officials can't really answer all those questions because we don't even know what it's going to look like sometimes.
Right.
But they're begging for that information because they're like, well, we don't know how to, what business are we going to lose? What are we going to lose from this, depending on what's going to happen from now in the next few days or weeks or months or whatever that looks like. I just think of that as being really big, just because, I don't know, businesses and then of course the news, both of those areas, I think just they want to know what those threat levels are.
I think so too. And I think sometimes it just adds to the chaos. Like if they just kind of went along, it's not really their expertise. Emergency management isn't. So if you're telling them what you know, basically, it's not like you're keeping a secret from them or anything.
Right. And then you don't want to give information that could be wrong, but then it seems like there's a delay or something is being kept. It's just that we're not sure yet.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, I definitely think if there was one area that they should focus on getting it operational, it would be, like you said, the situation awareness, just trying to keep everybody, communicating and aware of what condition the businesses are in, and where the emergency management plan is, how that's being integrated and that sort of thing as well. I think that would probably be the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest payout would be if they could get that part of it going. Some of the databases and stuff, I think, are a great idea, but to get everybody involved in that, I think that'd be a pretty complex, pretty big task.
Especially like in a bigger city too.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything to add? Anybody?
I was looking in the last part of the question to see if, I know it asked if this model could be more useful for short-term or long-term. Mm-hmm. And then I was going back through those key components. First, I was thinking long-term just because it seemed like, I don't know, long-term components. But then I read the stuff that says, effective preparation, recovery. Well, those are obviously longer term, but like facilitating the communication and updating about the status and identifying resources. And a lot of that, as we know, is short term. So
it could be either.
I think it's both. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the emergency management falls into both, like how we were talking about the continuity of operations versus just like the initial response. I think it could fall into both.
Yeah, I think it depends on what component you're looking at too. there's just a lot involved in those. So I think it's a little bit too spread out.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else to emphasize or add?
Yeah.
Of the discussion in general?
I mean, I guess we did the.
Hey guys, oh sorry to interrupt. I'm good, but I've got to go now. I've got to change out shifts with somebody. So.
Okay. Thank you for your input.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging in.
See you next week.
Okay.
I guess for the first time, I mean, it was good. You know, a lot of confusion for this, sending emails, links, all that kind of stuff. But finally, we got it. You know.
Go to.
It was nice to meet you, ladies. And I hopefully see you next week, and everything works out.
Sounds good. I guess we'll send an email to see what time next week.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, and I already sent you my cell phone number. You are free to text me, and let's work this out.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. I think you just hit stop and then it'll conclude and we'll still be here until we end.
Good night.